November 9th, 1943, 6:15 in the morning. Empress Augusta Bay, Bougainville Island. Sergeant Thomas Callahan had been awake for 3 hours, lying in the same position since 0300. The mud beneath him had soaked through his utilities hours ago, and his left leg had gone numb around 0430. He didn't move. Movement got you killed. The jungle around him was waking up. Birds he couldn't name made sounds he was still getting used to after 2 months in the South Pacific. Somewhere behind him, maybe 200 yards back, he could hear the low voices of Marines manning the perimeter foxholes. The conversation was quiet, careful. Everyone knew sound carried in the jungle, especially in the early morning when the air was still heavy with moisture. Callahan's Springfield M1903 rested against his shoulder, the stock worn smooth from use. The Unertl 8 power scope had been a pain to keep clean in this climate, but he'd managed. Through it, he could see the Japanese positions across the clearing, bunkers built into the hillside, covered with vegetation that would have been invisible without the scope. He'd been watching them since before dawn, noting where the sentries moved, where the command positions likely were. His spotter, Corporal James Rivera, had been hit yesterday. Sniper round, through the chest, dead before he hit the ground. They'd been working together for 4 months, since Guadalcanal. Rivera had been good at his job, patient, with sharp eyes and a head for numbers. Callahan missed him. More than that, he was angry about it. Captain Harold Morrison had come by the night before, crouching in Callahan's foxhole while artillery rumbled in the distance. "We need to keep them pinned down," Morrison had said. "Divisions pushing inland in 2 days. If the Japanese move up reinforcements, it's going to get bloody." Callahan had nodded. He understood the mission. Hold the perimeter. Make the Japanese nervous about moving in the open. Kill enough of them that they stayed in their holes. But there was a problem. The Japanese had learned to be careful. After Guadalcanal, after months of fighting Marines, they'd figured out how American snipers worked. They didn't expose themselves unnecessarily. Their officers stayed in cover. Their communication was disciplined. Callahan had taken 3 shots in 4 days, all of them at distances over 500 yards. 1 hit, 2 misses. Not good enough. That's when he'd noticed the soup can. It was sitting in a pile of trash near the command post. A Campbell's chicken noodle soup can, both ends cut off, probably used as a makeshift stove by someone. Callahan had picked it up, turned it over in his hands. The metal was dull but still reflective. In the right light, it would catch the sun. The idea had come to him slowly. The Japanese used heliograph mirrors for signaling. They'd seen American forces do the same. Signal Corps guys flashing messages across valleys when radio traffic was too risky. If you saw a flash of light from enemy lines, you paid attention. You tried to figure out what it meant. What if the flash didn't mean anything? What if it was just there to make you curious? He'd spent the evening preparing. Cut holes in the sides of the can for drainage. Didn't want it filling with rainwater. Found a stake he could drive into the ground. Rigged up a simple pulley system with parachute cord so he could tilt the can from a distance. Positioned it about 30 yards from his hide, angled toward where the sun would rise. Now, at 0615, the first light was coming through the canopy. Callahan watched through his scope as the ray caught the edge of the can. Brief flash. He waited 10 seconds, then pulled the cord. The can tilted. Another flash. From a slightly different angle. Through the scope, he saw movement in the Japanese positions. Someone had noticed. Callahan settled his breathing. Inhale slowly through the nose. Exhale through the mouth. Heart rate steady. The crosshairs of the Unertl scope were etched into his vision after months of use. He knew exactly where the bullet would go at this distance. 480 yards. Minimal wind. Slight upward angle to compensate for the elevation difference. A Japanese soldier emerged from one of the bunkers. He had binoculars around his neck, and he was looking directly at the area where Callahan had positioned the can. The soldier said something to someone still in the bunker, then moved forward, rifle slung across his back. Callahan put the crosshairs on the man's chest, squeezed the trigger. The Springfield kicked against his shoulder. Through the scope, he saw the soldier go down. The sound of the shot echoed across the clearing, flat and final. For a moment, nothing happened. Then mortars started firing from the Japanese positions, not at Callahan's hide, but at the area around the soup can. They'd assumed it was an American position. Shells burst in the clearing, throwing up dirt and shredded vegetation. Callahan didn't move. Let them waste ammunition on empty ground. When the barrage stopped, he checked the can through his scope. Still there, slightly bent, but functional. He waited another 15 minutes, then tilted it again. Flash, pause, flash. More movement from the Japanese lines. This time, an officer with a sword at his hip, gesturing to 2 soldiers. They were talking, probably trying to figure out what the flashes meant. Artillery spotter? Forward observer? Some new American tactic they hadn't seen before? The officer moved to a better vantage point, binoculars raised. Callahan fired again. By mid-morning, he had 4 confirmed kills. All officers or NCOs, all drawn out by curiosity about the flashing can. Captain Morrison came by during a lull, staying low as he approached the hide. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," Morrison said. "Their radio traffic is confused as hell. They think we've got a whole network of spotters out here." Callahan explained the soup can setup. Morrison looked at it for a long moment, then smiled grimly. "Simplest tricks work best," he said. "How many more cans can you get?" "Galley probably has a few dozen," Callahan said. "If this works, I can set up multiple positions. Make them think we've got forward observers all over this sector. Do it. I'll get you a security detail. 3 riflemen to watch your back while you work. And find yourself a new spotter from the replacement pool." That evening, as the sun set through the jungle canopy, Callahan collected 5 more cans from the mess area. He cleaned them, punched drainage holes, set up stakes at different positions around his operational area, each one angled differently, each one capable of producing flashes at different times of day as the sun moved. The Japanese were getting more aggressive, patrols probing the perimeter, artillery fire increasing. They were preparing for something, probably an assault to push the Marines back to the beach. Division needed time to consolidate, bring up reinforcements, establish supply lines. Callahan's job was to buy that time, one shot at a time. November 10th, 1943. Dawn. Rain had started around 0200 and hadn't let up. The kind of rain that turned the jungle into a steam bath, where everything was wet and nothing ever dried. Callahan's utilities clung to his skin, and his hands were wrinkled from constant moisture. The ghillie suit he'd constructed from local vegetation, palm fronds, vines, mud, was heavy with water. His new spotter, Private Ellis, was 19 years old and from Kansas. He'd been on Bougainville for 3 weeks and hadn't seen combat yet. Callahan had picked him because Ellis was quiet and didn't ask stupid questions. The kid had good eyes too, could spot movement at distance. "How's it work?" Ellis had asked the night before, when Callahan explained the soup can system. "Simple," Callahan said. "Japanese see flashes, they think it's signals. Officers come out to look, try to direct counter operations. That's when I shoot them. They fall for it? So far. Won't work forever. They'll figure it out eventually. But by then, maybe we won't need it anymore." Now, in the gray morning rain, Callahan pulled the first cord. The soup can tilted on its stake, catching what little light filtered through the clouds. Flash. He waited 30 seconds. Flash, flash. Not actual code, just something that looked deliberate enough to draw attention. Through the scope, magnified and slightly blurred by rain on the lens, he saw the Japanese positions. Harder to see in this weather, but movement was still visible. After 10 minutes, 2 soldiers emerged, moving cautiously toward the Marine lines. Scouts, probably, trying to figure out where the signals were coming from. Ellis whispered the wind call. 3 clicks left. Steady. Callahan adjusted his aim. The first scout rose slightly to get a better view over a fallen log. Distance, 425 yards. The crosshairs settled just above the man's collarbone, accounting for bullet drop at this range. He fired. The scout dropped. His partner froze for a second, fatal hesitation, then tried to run back to cover. Callahan worked the bolt, ejecting the spent brass, chambering a new round. Second shot, center mass. The scout made it another 3 steps before falling. 2 down, Ellis said quietly, making marks in his notebook. Every kill had to be confirmed, recorded. The Marine Corps was particular about that. The pattern continued through the morning. Callahan would trigger the cans at irregular intervals, creating the illusion of active signaling. Japanese soldiers would investigate or respond. Officers would expose themselves to direct their men, and Callahan would shoot them. By noon, he'd moved positions twice, dragging his equipment through the mud to new hides he'd prepared the day before. The Japanese were getting wise to his general location, dropping mortars closer with each barrage, but they still hadn't figured out the soup cans. 4 more kills in the afternoon. A sergeant directing a machine gun team shot through the head at 550 yards. An artillery observer with a radio pack chest shot at 480 yards. 2 more scouts who got too curious about the flashing cans. Total for the day, 8 confirmed. Word was spreading in the Marine lines. Callahan heard it when he went back for ammunition and rations that evening. "Soup cans at it again," someone said. "Japs keep coming out to look at his decoys." Captain Morrison pulled him aside. "Division wants this to continue. How much longer can you keep it up?" Callahan considered. Depends on how fast they adapt. Right now, they're confused. They think the flashes are real signals, so they're trying to locate our forward observers. Once they figure out it's bait, they'll stop taking it. And if they figure it out tomorrow, then I go back to regular sniping. But I'll have killed a lot of their leadership by then. Morrison nodded. You're getting 3 more riflemen for security, and all the soup cans you can use. Make it count. That night, Callahan set up 12 cans in a network covering 200 yards of jungle, each one positioned to catch light at different times, each one connected by cord to his primary hide position. He could trigger them in sequence, creating patterns that looked like coordinated signaling between multiple positions. The rain continued. In the distance, Japanese voices carried through the darkness, agitated, arguing. They knew something was happening, but they couldn't figure out what. Private Ellis cleaned the Springfield while Callahan prepared the next day's positions. The kid was learning fast, adapting to the rhythm of sniper work. Long periods of stillness interrupted by seconds of violence. Sergeant, Ellis said quietly, that scout this morning. The first one. He looked young. Callahan paused. They're pissed, Captain Morrison said, marking shell impacts on his map. That assault cost them. Now they're trying to soften us up for another push. Callahan nodded. The barrage continued for 20 minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it had started. In the silence that followed, you could hear wounded men calling for corpsmen, the crackle of fires started by the shells, the sound of Marines digging themselves out of collapsed positions. He went back to his assigned tent, just a canvas shelter, nothing fancy. Someone had collected the soup cans from the field, lined them up on an ammo crate like trophies. Callahan looked at them without expression. Rusted Campbell's soup cans with holes punched in the sides. They looked ridiculous, like garbage. Garbage that had killed 112 men. Private Ellis was there, writing letters home. He looked up when Callahan entered. You okay, Sergeant? Yeah, just need to sit for a while. But sitting didn't help. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the scope sight, crosshairs settling on targets that were men. The slight recoil as he squeezed the trigger. The way bodies fell, sometimes instantly, sometimes with that awful moment of delayed reaction before they realized they were dead. A chaplain came by in the afternoon. Navy lieutenant, Protestant. Heard you had a rough few days, Sergeant. Wanted to check in. I'm fine, sir. 112 kills is a heavy burden. Even when it's necessary. Even when you're saving your brothers. Taking life changes a man. Callahan didn't respond. The chaplain sat down on an empty crate, waiting. Finally, Callahan spoke. I keep thinking about the one with the sword. The lieutenant. Yesterday morning. I shot him, and he kept coming. Had to shoot him again. And I remember thinking, that's a brave man. Even while I was killing him, I respected him. Recognizing their humanity doesn't make you weak, the chaplain said. It makes you human. The real danger is when you stop seeing them as people. Ellis's dad said something similar. That remembering their men is what keeps you from becoming a monster. Ellis's dad is wise. Listen to him. Listen to that voice inside you that's troubled by what you've done, even though it was necessary. That's your conscience. Don't lose it. The chaplain left. Callahan sat alone with his thoughts and his rifle and the soup cans lined up like an accusation. News was spreading beyond the island. Correspondents had gotten hold of the story, probably from the colonel's report to division. Marine sniper uses soup cans to kill 112 Japanese. The headline would be in papers back home within a week, probably with photos of Callahan holding the cans, looking grim and heroic. It made him want to vomit. That evening, Captain Morrison called him to the command post. Division wants you to go stateside for a bit. War bond tour. You know the drill. Talk to recruits, raise money, build morale. I'd rather stay here, sir. Not your call, Sergeant. You're being rotated back to Camp Pendleton in 2 weeks. You'll do the bond tour, then probably train new snipers. Your war's over for now. Rivera's dead. The new replacements don't know what they're doing. The platoon needs experienced snipers. The platoon needs what the Corps says it needs. And right now, that's you back home being a hero. Morrison's voice softened. Besides, Callahan, you need the break. I can see it in your eyes. You're used up. Another week out here, you'll make a mistake and get killed. Go home. Rest. Come back when you're ready. Callahan knew Morrison was right. The exhaustion was bone deep. 5 days of constant tension, minimal sleep, the weight of 112 dead men. He was running on fumes. Yes, sir. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Callahan went through the motions, training a replacement sniper, turning over his sector responsibilities, filling out endless after-action reports. The Navy Cross came through, presented in a brief ceremony where Colonel Craig pinned it to his uniform while photographers snapped pictures. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry in action against enemy Japanese forces at Empress Augusta Bay, Bougainville Island, from November 9-13, 1943. Sergeant Callahan, with complete disregard for his own safety and through brilliant tactical innovation, eliminated 112 enemy combatants, including key leadership personnel, thereby disrupting enemy assault operations and enabling friendly forces to hold critical defensive positions. They wanted him to say something. He kept it brief. I did my job. Every Marine here did their job. The men we lost did their job. That's all. Private Ellis shipped out with him when the time came. They caught a transport plane from Henderson Field back to Guadalcanal, then a Liberty ship to Pearl Harbor, then finally to San Diego. The whole trip took 3 weeks. On the ship, Ellis asked him what he'd do after the war. Don't know. Farm, maybe. My family had land in Missouri. Maybe go back to that. You ever think about staying in? Making a career of the Corps? No, Callahan said immediately. This isn't something I want to do forever. I'm good at it, but that doesn't mean I should keep doing it. Fair enough. They arrived at Camp Pendleton in December. California was strange after the Pacific, dry, organized, full of people who had no idea what the jungle was like. Callahan reported to the training command and was immediately assigned to the sniper school as an instructor. The Bond tour started in January 1944. Rallies in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle. Callahan stood on stages in his dress uniform, the Navy Cross on his chest, while organizers told the story of the soup can sniper. The crowds loved it. They bought bonds, cheered, treated him like a hero. He hated every minute. The reporters always wanted details. How did you feel when you pulled the trigger? What went through your mind? Were you scared? He gave them bland, patriotic answers that meant nothing. He never told them about the lieutenant with the sword. He never told them how his hands still shook sometimes. He never told them that he saw those 112 faces whenever he closed his eyes. By March, he was back at Pendleton, training new scout snipers. He was good at it, patient, thorough, emphasizing fieldcraft and discipline. But he never told them about the soup cans. That story belonged to the war bond posters, not to actual training. The war went on. Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima. Callahan read the casualty reports and recognized names. Men he'd trained, men he'd served with. Private Ellis was killed on Saipan, June 1944, shot by a Japanese machine gunner while spotting for another sniper. Callahan got the news in a letter from Ellis's mother. She thanked him for teaching her son, for keeping him alive on Bougainville. She didn't know that Callahan had taught Ellis how to kill, how to stay still while men died around you, how to calculate wind and elevation and reduce human beings to targets. He never wrote back. What could he say? The war ended in August 1945. Callahan was still at Pendleton, still training snipers who would never get to use their skills in combat. He was relieved and disappointed in equal measure. He mustered out in October 1945, returning to civilian life with a chest full of medals and a head full of memories he couldn't share. He went back to Missouri, back to his family's farm. The land was run down, overgrown, but it was quiet. No artillery, no screaming, no soup cans flashing in the sun. June 1967, Quantico, Virginia. Thomas Callahan was 61 years old, grayer and thicker around the middle, but his hands were still steady. He stood in the National Museum of the Marine Corps, looking at a display case that held a mud-flecked Campbell soup can with holes punched in the sides. Next to it was his old Springfield M1903, the Unertl scope still mounted, though someone had cleaned and oiled it until it looked like new. The placard read, Sergeant Thomas M. Callahan, USMC, Bougainville Campaign, November 1943. Using improvised signal devices, Sergeant Callahan eliminated 112 enemy combatants in a 5-day period, the highest confirmed tally of the Pacific War. For his actions, he was awarded the Navy Cross. A young Marine corporal stood nearby, on guard duty for the museum. He glanced at Callahan, then at the placard, then back at Callahan. His eyes widened slightly. Sir, are you? Yeah, Callahan said. Long time ago. That's incredible, sir. 112 confirmed. That's a record that'll never be broken, Callahan didn't respond. Records. Numbers. It all seemed abstract, like it had happened to someone else. In some ways it had. The man who'd lain in the mud with that Springfield wasn't the same person standing here now. After the war, he'd tried farming for a few years. It didn't take. The land was too quiet, left him alone with his thoughts too much. He'd moved to St. Louis in 48, gotten a job as a machinist. Married in 51, Ellen a teacher, patient and kind. No kids, which was probably for the best. He wasn't sure he'd have been a good father. Ellen knew about the war in broad strokes. Medal, sniper, Pacific. He'd never told her the details. Never told her about the soup cans or the 112 men or the lieutenant with the sword. She'd learned not to wake him suddenly from nightmares. She'd learned that certain sounds, backfires, thunder, made him tense up. She'd learned that he was a good man with a dark place inside him that he kept carefully sealed. The war receded as the years passed. Korea happened, then Vietnam. New conflicts. New generation of Marines. Callahan watched it on television. The protests, the casualties, the confusion. War looked different through a TV screen. Cleaner, more heroic. Less like mud and fear and the wet sound of bullets hitting flesh. He'd received letters over the years from men he'd trained at Pendleton. Some thanked him for teaching them skills that kept them alive in Korea or Vietnam. Some asked questions about technique. One or two asked about the soup cans, but Callahan's responses were brief, technical. He never talked about what it felt like. In 1965, a writer from Life magazine had tracked him down, wanting to do a story about the soup can sniper. Where was he now? What did he think about Vietnam? Did he have any regrets? Callahan had refused, politely but firmly. That was a long time ago. I'm not that person anymore. But of course he was. That person was always there, just below the surface. The man who could reduce human beings to targets. The man who could shoot 112 times and not miss. The man who'd used soup cans and psychology to turn war into slaughter. The young corporal was still looking at him expectantly, probably hoping for a war story. Callahan didn't have one to give him. Not the kind he wanted, anyway. It was war, Callahan said finally. You do what needs doing. You live with it after. Were you scared? All the time. Anyone who says they weren't scared is lying or crazy. But you still did it? Yeah, I still did it. The corporal seemed satisfied with that answer. He went back to his post, leaving Callahan alone with the display case. 112 men. He knew what the number represented now, decades later, in a way he couldn't have known then. It represented 112 families getting telegrams, 112 funerals, 112 graves in Japanese cemeteries, assuming the bodies were recovered. It represented 112 futures that never happened, children never born, careers never started, old men who never got to be old. It also represented the Marines who'd survived because the Japanese assault was broken. How many of them lived because he'd disrupted the enemy command structure? 30? 50? 100? The math was impossible, but the trade-off was real. Did that balance make it okay? Callahan didn't know. He'd stopped trying to figure that out years ago. It was what it was. Necessary killing in a necessary war. Necessary didn't mean good. Necessary didn't mean clean. It just meant there was no other choice. He thought about Corporal Rivera sometimes, the spotter killed by a Japanese sniper on November 8, 1943. Rivera had been 23 years old, engaged to a girl in Texas, planning to study engineering after the war. He died in mud on an island most Americans couldn't find on a map, and his death had set in motion the events that led to 112 more deaths. Cause and effect, action and reaction. The infinite chain of violence that was war. Ellen was waiting outside the museum. They'd driven up from St. Louis for a Marine Corps reunion. Not his unit, he'd never attended those, but a general gathering. She'd suggested they stop by the museum on the way home. You okay? She asked when he came out. Yeah, just thinking. About the war? Always about the war. They drove home in comfortable silence. Ellen had learned, over 16 years of marriage, that sometimes he needed quiet, that the dark place inside him would open up and he'd need to sit with it for a while before he could seal it again. That night, in their hotel room in D.C., Callahan dreamed. Same dream he'd been having for 24 years. He was back in the hide, rifle steady, soup cans flashing in the sun. The crosshairs settled on target after target, but in the dream, when he pulled the trigger, nothing happened. The targets kept coming, getting closer, until he could see their faces clearly. The lieutenant with the sword was always last. He'd stop a few feet away, sword raised, and look at Callahan with sad eyes. Not angry, not accusing, just sad. Then Callahan would wake up, heart pounding, and Ellen would be there, her hand on his shoulder, bringing him back to the present. Same one? She'd ask. Same one? It's been over 20 years, I know. Have you thought about talking to someone? One of those psychiatrists? What would I say? That I killed 112 men and it bothers me? They'd probably say I should be bothered. That feeling bad about it means I'm still human. You are human, Tom. You've always been human. That's why it still bothers you. He pulled her close, grateful for her presence, her patience, her understanding of things she'd never experienced. She was his anchor to the present, the proof that he was more than just a killer from a long-ago war. The years continued to pass. The Vietnam War ended. New wars started. The 20th century gave way to the 21st. Callahan retired from the machine shop in 1982, spent his days working in a small garden, reading, trying to find peace. He never did. Not fully. The war was always there. A scar that had healed, but never faded. In 2004, at age 98, Thomas Callahan died quietly, in his sleep. Ellen had passed 3 years earlier, and he'd been ready to follow. His funeral was small, a few neighbors, some distant relatives, a Marine honor guard who didn't know his full story. They buried him in a veterans cemetery outside St. Louis. The headstone was simple. Thomas Michael Callahan, Sergeant, United States Marine Corps 1906-2004 Navy Cross faithful, unto death. No mention of soup cans or 112 confirmed kills. Just a name, rank, dates, and a medal. The story behind those things died with him, sealed away in that dark place he'd carried for 61 years. But the soup can remained in the museum at Quantico, and every year young Marines would stand in front of it, reading about the record-setting sniper of Bougainville, and they'd marvel at his skill and courage. They'd never know what it cost him. War is hell, they say. But sometimes, the hell doesn't end when the shooting stops. Sometimes, you carry it with you forever, hidden behind a normal life, surfacing in dreams and quiet moments when your mind drifts back to a jungle on an island most people have never heard of. Sometimes, victory comes in the simplest, most terrible disguises. And sometimes, the price of that victory is paid in installments over a lifetime. The soup can sits in its display case, inert metal with holes punched in the sides. To most people, it's a curiosity, a clever trick from a long-ago war. But to Thomas Callahan, it was something else entirely. It was proof that necessity doesn't equal righteousness, that skill doesn't equal pride, that winning doesn't equal peace. It was a reminder that he'd been good at something terrible, and that being good at something doesn't make it good. And it was a monument to 112 men who died because he was better at killing than they were at staying alive. War is hell, and hell leaves marks that never fade. End all young, Ellis. We're all young. That's who fights wars. Doesn't make it easier. No, Callahan agreed. It doesn't. But easier or not, the work continued. The perimeter had to hold. Division needed time. And Sergeant Thomas Callahan, with his Springfield and his soup cans, was buying that time in the only currency war understood. November 11th, 1943. Mid-morning. The heat was brutal. The rain had stopped around dawn, and now the jungle was steaming, moisture evaporating in visible waves. Callahan's hide was positioned in a slight depression, covered by a camouflage net he'd woven from local plants. Inside, the temperature had to be over 100 degrees. Sweat ran down his face constantly, and he had to wipe the scope lens every few minutes. 23 confirmed kills in 3 days. The number felt abstract. 23 men who wouldn't go home. 23 families who'd get telegrams. Callahan tried not to think about it that way. Think of them as targets. Think of them as threats to your brothers in the foxholes. Think of them as the people who killed Rivera. It helped. Not much, but it helped. The soup can network had expanded. He now had control over 15 cans positioned throughout his sector. The strings ran back to his hide like a spider's web, each one carefully arranged so he could trigger different patterns. Flash from the left. Pause. Double flash from the right. Long flash from center. To the Japanese observers, it must have looked like an organized communication system. Through his scope, Callahan watched the enemy command bunker. He'd identified it 2 days ago. Better construction than the others, more foot traffic, and he'd seen maps being consulted. An officer had emerged 3 times this morning, probably the company or battalion commander. Each time, he'd looked toward the Marine lines with binoculars, studying something, studying the flashes. The officer appeared again, this time with several subordinates. He was pointing, giving orders. Callahan watched as troops began forming up. Not a small patrol, but a full platoon, maybe 30 men. They were getting ready to move. They're coming to find the source, Ellis whispered. Should we relocate? Not yet, Callahan said. Let them commit. The Japanese platoon moved out, advancing cautiously through the jungle. Their lead elements were good, proper spacing, using cover, moving in bounds. These weren't green troops. They'd been trained well. Callahan triggered a can on their flank. Flash. The platoon leader halted his men, consulted with his sergeants. They adjusted their direction, moving toward the flash. 500 yards. shadows. 450, 400. The platoon leader climbed onto a slight rise to get better visibility. Callahan had been waiting for that. Officers always wanted the high ground for observation. He fired. The officer went down. Immediately, the platoon scattered. Some men hitting the dirt, others running for nearby cover. But they were confused now, leaderless. A sergeant tried to take command, standing up to rally his men. Callahan shot him too. Another sergeant, this one smarter, stayed low but was shouting orders. Callahan watched his position, waited for the inevitable moment when the man would have to expose himself to see what he was commanding. There, rising just enough to see over a log. Third shot. Third kill. The platoon was breaking apart. Some men were trying to advance, others were falling back. No coordination, no leadership. Their machine gunners were setting up, but without officers to direct them, they were firing at shadows. Callahan worked methodically. Fourth shot, a soldier carrying a radio pack. Fifth shot, another NCO trying to organize a withdrawal. Sixth shot, a machine gunner. Ellis called out ranges and wind, his voice steady despite what they were watching. 380 yards. Wind from the left, 2 clicks. Target moving left to right, 7th shot. By the time the survivors made it back to their lines, Callahan had killed 11 of them. The rest were running, abandoning equipment, dragging wounded. The soup cans had done their job, pulled an entire platoon out of position, exposed them, broken them. Captain Morrison came by in the afternoon, bringing fresh ammunition and water. "You've got their attention now," he said. "Radio intercepts show they think you're running a forward observer network. They're planning something big to knock it out. How big? Company strength, maybe more. They're bringing up their countersniper teams too. We've identified at least 3 enemy snipers moving into this sector." Callahan nodded. He'd expected this. Success drew attention. "I'll need to vary my routine. Change positions more frequently. Do what you need to do." Division's pleased with the results. "You're disrupting their entire command structure in this sector." After Morrison left, Callahan relocated to his secondary hide, 150 yards from his primary position. He'd learned this lesson on Guadalcanal. Never use the same position twice, if you could avoid it. Predictability killed snipers faster than enemy fire. The new hide was in a banyan tree, 20 feet up, platform built from branches and camouflaged to blend with the foliage. It gave him a different angle on the Japanese positions, and made him harder to locate from ground level. Ellis climbed up with him, setting up the spotting scope. "Sergeant, you ever think about what happens after? After what? After the war. What do you do with this? Being good at this?" Callahan didn't answer right away. He'd thought about it, late at night, when sleep wouldn't come. What did a man do when his primary skill was killing people from a distance? "I don't know, Ellis. Guess I'll figure it out when we get there. If we get there." "When?" Callahan said firmly. "When we get there." As dusk fell, he triggered the soup cans one more time. Flash, flash from the left. Single flash from the right. The Japanese responded with mortars, but they were firing at the cans, not at his position. Good. Let them waste ammunition. Somewhere in the enemy lines, a sniper was studying the same terrain Callahan was watching. The Ghost of Rabaul, intelligence had called him. A Japanese countersniper with over 40 kills. Veteran of Guadalcanal and New Georgia. Callahan had heard the stories. A patient, disciplined shooter who never took unnecessary risks. Tomorrow, they'd probably meet. Callahan cleaned his rifle in the fading light, checking every mechanism. The Springfield was old but reliable. It had saved his life more times than he could count. 41 confirmed kills now, in 4 days. The highest tally in the division. Probably the highest in the entire South Pacific campaign. It didn't feel like an accomplishment. It felt like work that needed doing. The night brought sounds of movement from the Japanese lines. They were repositioning, preparing. Something was coming. Callahan settled into the hide, rifle across his lap, and waited for dawn. November 12th, 1943. 0620 hours. Callahan knew he was being hunted before he saw any evidence. It was a feeling, an instinct developed over months of this work. The jungle felt different. The normal sounds were there. Birds, insects, the distant rumble of artillery. But something was off. Someone was watching. He'd been in his elevated hide since 0400, scanning the Japanese positions through the Unertl scope. Ellis was beside him, using the spotting scope to check different sectors. They'd triggered the soup cans 3 times already, but the response from the Japanese had been muted. No curious officers emerging, no patrols investigating. They'd learned. "Sergeant," Ellis whispered, 11 o'clock, ridgeline, 700 yards. Callahan swung the Springfield slowly. At first, he saw nothing. Then, for just a fraction of a second, a glint. Lens reflection. Someone with optics was over there, and they'd made a mistake. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was bait. Could be their countersniper, Ellis said. The one intelligence briefed us about, Callahan studied the position. Good hide, well camouflaged, excellent field of view. Whoever was over there had chosen the position with care. They could see most of Callahan's operational area, including 2 of his previous hide sites. The question was, had they spotted his current position? He got his answer 30 seconds later, when a bullet snapped through the air inches from his head. The crack of the rifle followed a split second later. A 6.5mm round from a Type 97, probably. The Japanese countersniper rifle. Callahan dropped flat on the platform, pulling Ellis down with him. He's got us bracketed, Callahan said. Saw my scope flash. Another round hit the tree trunk below them, bark exploding. The Japanese sniper was walking his shots, trying to get the range. Third shot went high, clipping leaves above their position. They couldn't stay here, but moving would expose them, give the enemy sniper an easy target. Callahan thought fast, looking at his setup. The soup cans were still in position, strings running to his current hide. He had one on a stake about 15 yards from the tree, angled to catch morning sun. Ellis, hand me that extra can from the pack. The private passed it over, confused. Callahan tied it to his rifle barrel with parachute cord, then carefully extended the rifle over the edge of the platform, angling the can to catch sunlight. He pulled the string from his main can setup at the same time. Flash from the ground level can. Flash from the one on his rifle. The Japanese sniper took the bait. A shot rang out, hitting the can on Callahan's rifle and sending it spinning away. For just a second, the enemy sniper would be working his bolt, chambering a new round, checking to see if he'd hit his target. Callahan was already moving. He rolled to the opposite side of the platform, bringing the Springfield up, finding the enemy position through his scope. There, movement in the hide on the ridge. The Japanese sniper shifting position, probably realizing he'd been tricked. The crosshairs settled. Range, 720 yards. Wind from the right, 3 to 4 miles per hour. Elevation, shooting slightly upward. Callahan made the adjustments automatically. Muscle memory from hundreds of shots. He fired. Through the scope, he saw the impact. The camouflage net on the enemy hide jerked, and he caught a glimpse of a figure slumping. A Type 97 rifle tumbled out of the hide, falling 20 feet to the jungle floor. Hit, Ellis confirmed through the spotting scope. He's down, but there was no time to celebrate. Movement from the same area. 2 more Japanese soldiers. Probably the counter-sniper team's security element. They were breaking cover, trying to reach their fallen comrade. Callahan worked the bolt, fired again. One of them went down, the other made it to cover, but Callahan had marked the position. When the soldier tried to move again, Callahan was ready. Third shot. The soldier didn't get up. The Japanese positions erupted with fire. Machine guns, mortars, rifles, everything they had, all aimed at Callahan's general area. Most of it was wild, uncoordinated. They were angry, frustrated. Their best sniper was dead, and they wanted revenge. Callahan and Ellis stayed flat on the platform, letting the fire pass over them. A mortar round hit close enough to shake the tree, and shrapnel whined through the foliage. Ellis's spotting scope took a hit, lens shattering. "We need to move," Ellis said. "They're ranging in on us," Callahan agreed. They gathered essential gear, rifle, ammunition, canteens, and descended the tree as quickly as they dared. Mortar fire was getting closer, the Japanese walking rounds toward their position. They made it to the ground and started moving, staying low, using the jungle for cover. Behind them, a mortar round hit the tree they'd just been in, sending the platform crashing down in a shower of splinters and leaves. They relocated to a prepared hide 200 yards away, this one at ground level, dug into the base of a massive root system. Once they were settled, Callahan checked his ammunition. He'd fired 7 rounds in the engagement. He had maybe 150 rounds left total. Ellis was checking himself for wounds, making sure none of the shrapnel had caught him. He was shaking slightly, adrenaline wearing off. "You did good," Callahan told him. Stayed calm, kept calling ranges. "That's how you stay alive." "That sniper," Ellis said. "He almost had us. Almost doesn't count. We got him first. That's what matters." But Callahan knew it had been close. Another second, another inch, and the Japanese sniper would have put a round through his skull. The ghost of Rabal was dead, but he'd almost taken Callahan with him. Captain Morrison found them an hour later, after the barrage had subsided. "We heard the fire." "Status? Enemy countersniper neutralized," Callahan reported. 3 additional Kia. "Position compromised?" We've relocated? Morrison nodded. Japanese radio traffic is going crazy. They're organizing a major assault, probably tomorrow at dawn. Company strength? Maybe more. They want to overrun this sector before we can consolidate. We'll be ready. Can you keep working? Keep them off balance? Callahan looked at his rifle, at the remaining ammunition, at Private Ellis still getting his nerves under control. We'll keep working. Because that's what they did. That's what Marines did. The mission came first. That night, Callahan reset his soup can network, positioning the cans to cover likely assault routes. If the Japanese were coming in force tomorrow, he'd make them pay for every yard. 78 confirmed kills now. The number was starting to feel real, heavy. 78 men who wouldn't see tomorrow. He pushed the thought away. Rivera wouldn't see tomorrow either. None of this would matter if the perimeter didn't hold. Callahan lay in his hide, rifle close, and waited for dawn. November 13th, 1943. 0455 hours. They came with bugles. Callahan heard them first. Those eerie, high-pitched notes that Japanese forces used to signal attacks. Then voices, hundreds of them, shouting in unison. Through the pre-dawn darkness, he could see movement. A lot of movement. Jesus, Ellis whispered. That's not a company. That's bigger. He was right. Intelligence had underestimated. This wasn't a company assault. This was battalion strength. Maybe more. Over 100 men, possibly 200, charging straight into the Marine perimeter. The flashes from Callahan's soup can suddenly seemed inadequate, almost laughable. But he'd positioned them along the assault route, and as the first light of dawn broke through the canopy, they caught the sun and blazed. The charging Japanese soldiers saw the flashes. Some hesitated, uncertain. Officers shouted orders, waving swords, pushing their men forward. That hesitation was enough. Callahan opened fire. First shot, an officer with a sword raised high, screaming orders. The man dropped mid-stride, sword falling from nerveless fingers. Work the bolt. Eject. Chamber. Acquire. Target. Second shot, a sergeant directing a machine gun team into position. Chest shot at 380 yards. Work the bolt. Third shot, another officer, this one with a pistol, trying to rally men who were breaking formation. Work the bolt. The Springfield's action was smooth from use, the brass casings ejecting in a steady rhythm. Ellis called ranges wind, but Callahan barely needed it anymore. He was in the zone, that strange state where everything slowed down and the world narrowed to the scope sight and the targets. Fourth shot. Fifth. Sixth. Officers and NCOs fell. The Japanese advance was beginning to fragment. Units losing cohesion without leadership. But there were so many of them. For every one Callahan killed, 10 more kept coming. Marines along the perimeter opened up. BARs thumping, M1 Garands cracking, machine guns chattering. The jungle erupted in gunfire. But the heart of the defensive fire was still Callahan's Springfield, methodically cutting down anyone who tried to organize the assault. A machine gun crew set up 400 yards out, trying to provide covering fire for the infantry. Callahan shot the gunner. The assistant gunner tried to take over. Callahan shot him too. A third soldier reached for the gun. Third shot. Ellis was keeping count in his notebook. The numbers climbing. 20 kills. 25. 30. Callahan's shoulder was starting to bruise from the rifle's recoil. His hands were raw from working the bolt. The barrel was hot enough to raise steam when rain droplets hit it. He didn't stop. A Japanese lieutenant made it to within 200 yards of the Marine lines, sword flashing, leading a final, desperate charge. Callahan put the crosshairs on him and fired. The lieutenant staggered but kept coming, probably running on adrenaline and determination. Second shot. The man finally fell. By 0700, the assault was broken. The Japanese were withdrawing, dragging wounded, leaving dead scattered across the kunai grass and jungle floor. Bodies lay in rough lines marking their advance. First wave closest to the Marine positions, second wave further back, third wave barely past their own start line. Callahan lowered the Springfield. His hands were shaking now that the action was over. The rifle barrel was too hot to touch. Empty brass casings littered the hide. Dozens of them. He'd lost count of his shots, but Ellis hadn't. 112, Ellis said, voice hoarse. 112 confirmed in 5 days. 27 this morning alone. Captain Morrison appeared, staying low even though the firing had stopped. He looked at Callahan, at the rifle, at the pile of brass, then out at the field of bodies. You just saved the beachhead, Sergeant, Morrison said quietly. Without you breaking their command structure, that assault might have punched through. Callahan didn't respond. He was staring at the soup cans, still glinting uselessly in the morning sun. They'd done their job. Drew the Japanese in, made them expose their leadership, turned their assault into a slaughter. But at what cost? He thought about the lieutenant with the sword, the one who'd kept coming even after the first shot. That kind of courage deserved better than dying in the mud 8,000 miles from home. They all deserved better. The Japanese soldiers, the Marines in the foxholes, Corporal Rivera rotting in a grave back at the field cemetery. Sergeant? Morrison was looking at him with concern. I'm fine, sir. Just tired. Get some rest. We're pulling you off the line for a few days. You've earned it. As they made their way back to the command post, Marines called out to Callahan. Soup can. Got him again. Way to go, Sergeant. They meant well, but Callahan barely heard them. He was somewhere else, seeing the lieutenant's face through his scope, watching the man fall. At the command post, Colonel Edward Craig was waiting. He looked at Callahan's mud-caked uniform, the 1,000-yard stare, the rifle still clutched tight. 112 confirmed kills, Craig said. Highest individual tally of the campaign? Probably the highest in the entire Pacific Theater. You'll be recommended for the Navy Cross. Callahan nodded mechanically. Awards and decorations felt distant, meaningless. That night he sat alone in a supply tent, cleaning his rifle by lamplight. The Springfield came apart in his hands. Bolt, trigger assembly, barrel. He cleaned each piece methodically, the familiar ritual helping to quiet his mind. Private Ellis found him there. Sergeant, you should eat something. Get some sleep. In a minute, Ellis sat down beside him. You saved a lot of lives today. Our guys. They would have been overrun without you breaking that assault. I know. But you don't feel good about it? No, Callahan admitted. I don't. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sounds of the perimeter, sentries calling passwords, working parties moving supplies, distant artillery. My dad was in the last war, Ellis said. France, 1918. He never talked about it much. But once, when I was older, he told me that the killing got easier after a while. And that's what scared him most. Not the dying, but how normal it all became. Callahan reassembled the rifle, each piece clicking into place. Your dad was a smart man. He said the only thing that kept him human was remembering that they were men too. The Germans. That they had families, lives, reasons for being there. That killing them was necessary, but it wasn't good. It's not good, Callahan agreed. It's just necessary. He finished with the rifle, loaded it, set it aside. Get some sleep, Ellis. We're not done here yet. But that night, sleep wouldn't come. Callahan lay on his cot, staring at the tent ceiling, seeing faces through his scope. 112 of them. Each one a person, not just a target. The war would go on. The battle for Bougainville would continue. But something had broken inside Thomas Callahan that morning, and he wasn't sure it could be fixed. November 13th, 1943. Late morning. The Japanese artillery found its range around 1100 hours. Not the scattered harassment fire they'd been lobbing at the perimeter for days, but a real barrage. 75 Memin guns, maybe 105s, firing in coordinated salvos. Someone competent was directing the fire, walking rounds methodically across the Marine positions. Callahan was in the command post bunker when it started, giving his after-action report to Colonel Craig. The first shells hit 200 yards away. The second salvo was 150 yards. The third was close enough to feel. Concussion waves that made your chest compress and your ears ring even through the sandbags and logs of the bunker.